Hi everybody, it's meteorologist Joe Cioffi on this Wednesday, the 1st of August, 2018. I took a day off yesterday just to kind of zone out a little bit. Sometimes you have to do that every once in a while. So that's the reason why there was no live on Tuesday, but we're back to normal here on this Wednesday evening as we watch the same old story going on with respect to the weather in the east. All this tropical moisture. We've had some downpours, we've had some thunderstorms, and we are also going to look at the tropics, both on the Atlantic side, and interestingly enough, we are going to also look at the tropics on the Pacific side, which we don't often do unless it's some threat to land somewhere. And if you look on the lower right, southwest of the Baja Peninsula, we have Tropical Storm Hector that is moving westward, and over on the left side of the screen you can pick out where the Hawaiian Islands are, and if you watch how the clouds are flowing across the tropical Pacific, they're pretty much marching along in a west to east direction. So we're going to talk a little bit more about this later on. Some of the models want to take it pretty far to the west and actually hold it together for a long enough period of time that perhaps it might be eventually something that Hawaii might want to pay attention to. Tropical storms and hurricanes going to Hawaii, they always have odd things happening to them. They take last-minute jogs in one direction or another. They weaken rapidly as they approach the islands, depending on the time of year. All sorts of strange outcomes. So we'll come back to that in just a second. The first thing right off the bat is I want to take a look at what's happening tonight in the east, because we have this tropical airflow that's been going on. And by the way, you know, I not kind of mentioned it. I did talk about this morning on my first morning post on the website at meteorologistjoecioffi.com. I was a bit suspect in the Storm Prediction Center's severe weather outlook for the east. I kind of thought that it was a bit overdone. They had an area of slight risk indicated, covering a portion from northeastern Virginia on up into western New England. And then after I did that, a little later on in the morning hours, probably around 9 or 9:30, they went and expanded the area of risk for severe weather further to the north, further to the east, and further to the south, all the way down into Georgia. And then gradually this afternoon, they've been having to pull back on that. And then now they've gotten rid of the slight risk entirely. They do have a marginal risk of severe weather up and down the east coast, east of the Appalachians, which I think is totally justified, by the way. The biggest threat here, really, from these storms in the east is the heavy rain. And there are flash flood watches, which I'll get to in a second, that reflect all this. We also have a marginal risk of severe weather over parts of Wisconsin into the northern parts of Iowa, southeastern Minnesota, and then a small area of marginal risk in New Mexico and in West Texas. A little bit of monsoon action going on in the southwest and back into parts of California, and that really is about it. We also have some heavy downpours and thunderstorms that extend from the west side of the Appalachians down into the Florida Panhandle, and some scattered thunderstorms in and around the state of Florida. Here's the Weather Service's map with the watches that they have up, and the occasional warnings that are up as well. And the darker greens from the Florida Panhandle up through southeastern Alabama, northern half of Georgia, western South North Carolina and Virginia, the western part of those three states, much of West Virginia, and a good chunk of of Pennsylvania, covering all of central Pennsylvania in a flash flood watch. Now you got to remember, a lot of these areas are absolutely soaked when it's come to the rain, when it's come to rainfall in the last in some cases in the last 10 days. Parts of Pennsylvania getting over a foot of rain. And in some cases, like parts of western Virginia and West Virginia, it seems to be have been raining there every day for the last 2.5 months. the rainfall amounts in some of these areas has been incredibly excessive. So there is the risk for river flooding here that could come in a hurry if you wind up with some organized activity as far as thunderstorms are concerned. The upside is the fact that for areas in Pennsylvania, for example, and in Maryland, which got hit very hard last week, the trough position is further to the west this time around. So as a result, the heaviest rains seem to be setting up further west, which is a bit of a plus. The activity that we've seen in eastern Pennsylvania through southern New England today has been a bit more scattered in nature. In fact, more of the area has not seen thunderstorm activity and downpour activity than has. The constant through all of this is the fact that the humidity is completely out of control. Here are the rainfall amounts for the next 7 days. So you can see they're concentrated from parts of central and northern New England in through the middle and upper Hudson Valley of New York State, eastern Pennsylvania, then it kind of slides southwestward from there into West Virginia, western North Carolina, eastern Tennessee, and into South Carolina and Georgia. You got a pretty solid band there of 2 to some areas showing 5 inches of rain. The areas along the Gulf Coast from the Florida Panhandle to southeastern Louisiana, the immediate Gulf Coast in the 2 to 5 inch rain band area. Otherwise, everybody else generally showing rainfall amounts of 1.5 inches or less during the next 7 days. This tropical flow in the east has just been, to me, it's been brutal and unrelenting. And we are going to continue with this issue over the next, today being Wednesday, so at least through next Tuesday for sure, and after that, not sure. Okay, just to give you an idea, I was looking at some of the dew points that were being forecasted by weather models during the middle part of the afternoon over the next 6 or 7 days. And you can see at least for areas from Virginia, Maryland, southeastern Pennsylvania, down into southern New Jersey, the dew points are running pretty much in the low 70s. They catch a little bit of a slight dip, ever so slight dip into the upper 60s, but that isn't enough to make a big difference. The bottom line is the humidity is going to be a problem. And it's going to be a problem through next week. What will change, however, is the threat for thunderstorms and downpours, because we are going to see a bit of a shift in the upper air pattern. And this is where you probably will start to see less in the way of downpours, but it's going to be replaced by heat. And here's why. So here's your upper air. And we'll put it in the paint box a little bit. We'll fool around with this and take a look at what this all means. So with respect to the current pattern, let me just make sure we got the paint box up, which we do not, but we will have it up there in a second. Okay, so here is the jet stream flow, the upper layers of the atmosphere. This was this morning, at 8 a.m. this morning, and I'm looking at the NAM model here, by the way. So there's your upper trough, and you've got this south-southwest flow up the Appalachians and into the east. You've got this upper high that is sitting off the southeast coast of the United States, and that anchors that trough on one side, and on the other side you've got the eastern part of the upper ridge that's in the southwest, holding this trough in position. The tropical flow from the Gulf of Mexico and the Atlantic moves up the eastern seaboard, but the difference this time around has been the fact that we're seeing more of the moisture track further to the west this time around, as opposed to the last time. If you remember from last week we had the trough that we were dealing with then. The axis of that particular trough, similar to this, except the axis of the trough was more along the east coast. So as a result, we were in a more continuous flow of air, of tropical air, and the downpours that we had to deal with and the thunderstorms and the 1 foot plus rains over a 7 or 8 day period. With the trough axis further west, we can shift the rains a bit further to the west, and that's what we really have seen so far, and I think we're going to continue to see this going into the weekend. The issue is, however, is what happens later in the weekend, as this trough is not going to be hanging around for too long. We are going to see it gradually weaken, and that is going to create a new pattern for us to deal with here in the eastern states, something that we have seen from time to time over the last few months, but every time it does happen, it doesn't seem to last very long. And as we go into the weekend, notice the trough disappears and the upper high in the Atlantic builds back westward. So this is going to it's going to change the flow aloft in the northeast to west or west-southwest. It'll be a bit of a drier flow from the standpoint of being able to produce thunderstorms. On the other hand, the low-level humidity is going to be very high. So we are going to continue to just basically be in the soup. But for Sunday and Monday, and maybe even into for Tuesday, depending on timing, we are going to see temperatures getting up into the 90s for those 3 days. Something definitely I'm looking forward to. And then after that, the trough in the east drops back in, so it'll at least cut the heat off. And eventually, I think it winds up cutting down the dew points. If we look at the GFS does not have a dew point for this particular region, but it does have it, I believe, for the type view. Hang on, I'm going to try to find this. The NAM did. I don't know how I had that before. I gotta figure this out. I thought I had a dew point measure. Well, I found the dew point map before, but I guess I can't see. I'm going to have to figure out how I got to it earlier. All right, so let's go back to the surface here, starting with present time. So here are your next 3 days, pretty much wash, rinse, repeat here as far as that goes. Saturday, you start to see a slow change with that upper high trying to build back westward, and it'll probably pay off from the standpoint of diminishing shower and thunderstorm activity starting on Sunday and continuing into Monday. There could be some isolated cells, but we're not going to have this kind of long fetch area of downpours and thunderstorms running up and down the coast or just inland of the coast. Rather, they'll just be scattered in nature. But the winds are going to go from south to south-southwest to southwest, and then eventually to west-southwest, and this is going to bring the temperatures up. Will bring the temperatures up into the 90s. Tuesday brings the next cold front through into the east, and that will probably produce some showers and storms late in the day, Tuesday or Tuesday night, and then later on next week, a second front comes by, and this argues that we could see a bit of cooling and perhaps lower dew points late next week through next weekend. That's something to look forward to. The upper air pattern overall continues to show that the trough wants to be in the east. Actually, we were talking about this earlier with my colleagues on how the models, try to build a ridge in, and then subsequent runs keep coming back to this idea of a trough in the east. So here's your ridge that builds in over the weekend, only to have a trough gradually replace that, and then that trough lifts out. We do have another strong upper ridge that builds into the northeast the week of August 13th, so Monday and Tuesday, August 13th and 14th, trough drops back in. I would just say, by the way, you're judging from the European today. European has a much more aggressive looking trough here in the east. Now, whether it lifts out in the same way or not remains to be seen. This is again toward the end of the period, so this would be for next weekend. But at the very least, it does show that we're going to get into some cooling and lower humidity at some point here, as long as we keep seeing these troughs wanting to drop into the eastern part of the United States. Now, let's come back to the tropics. So we'll go to the Atlantic tropics here because nothing has changed at all in terms of what we're dealing with. In fact, if you look at the last frames here as we go to sunset, you see this big upper low that is off the coast of Africa. It extends out into the eastern Atlantic, and when we have another push of Saharan dust in there, so that is going to be a hindrance to tropical storm development. We also have an upper low high up in the atmosphere sitting off the southeast coast of the U.S., off the Florida coast and north of Cuba. That is going to create wind shear conditions. You can see the clouds in the Caribbean going pretty much from south to north, so the upper air winds just are not there. And by the way, also notice the very anemic intertropical convergence zone, the area of thunderstorms that forms usually in this time of year between 10 degrees north and 20 degrees north, and you sometimes get disturbances that come out of this. Notice there's that east-west band of bright white clouds that extends from the Windward Islands eastward to south of the Cabo Verde Islands to off the coast of eastern Africa. We're seeing some convection there, but it is very, very anemic looking, and I think a lot of this has to do with the impact of the upper lows that have been out in the tropical Atlantic, and again that persistent dust in the Sahara. Now let's come back and go to the Pacific side. Okay, want to take a look at this because there's nothing. This is purely speculative on my part, so just bear that in mind. With respect to Hawaii, I'm going to we're going to try to find we're going to start in the Eastern Pacific here, so we could take a look at what the upper air looks like going forward. This is the Europeans' view, and this is its representation at the upper atmosphere of Hector. Actually, that isn't even Hector that it's showing. This is another system that comes out late in the period off the coast of Mexico, so you can barely find what it sees as Hector. So I think what we'll do is we'll go to the GFS to see if it's got a better view of this. And indeed it does. This is at 42 hours, and it just kind of marches it west or even south of west through 96 hours. And then we'll go to the Eastern Pacific view here at this point. We're looking at the upper air, by the way. I'll take you downstairs in just a second, but you see this line that's labeled 588. That is the height line that is under the upper high that is sitting in the southwest. So the flow across the Pacific is pretty much easterly, from east to west, and Hector is caught underneath. It's far enough south where it's caught underneath this upper ridge that's near the west coast, the southwest, and gets pushed along westward. So eventually it makes its appearance here in the Central Pacific, and at least through 126 hours, which is 5 days from now, it is west-southwest of the big island of Hawaii. The question is, where does it go from here? And there is, at least from what the models are showing, looks like a ridge builds north of Hawaii. So if that is the case, it's going to want to deflect this thing more to the west rather than turn it toward the north. And at least the GFS, a week from now, has it being a rather close call for the Hawaiian Islands. Now, at this point, this is purely speculative, obviously. There is the big question is going to be, is the model correct with building this upper ridge north of the Hawaiian Islands? And it may not be. This could wind up being weaker, in which case you could wind up with something that turns more northwesterly over time as it gets out to about 140 or 150 west. So speculative in nature. We're going to watch this as obviously as it evolves. The other thing that the GFS does, which is kind of interesting, so here it is coming into view of the Central Pacific. It does intensify this into a Category 2 hurricane, and actually maintains its strength, keeps it pretty strong as it passes it south of the Hawaiian Islands before it starts to weaken it and turn it to the northwest. So that ridge, in terms of what's going to happen to Hawaii, that ridge, or not happen to Hawaii, that ridge that's going to try and build north of the Hawaiian Islands is really going to be key to all of this going forward. On the Atlantic side, we have, as we said, there's very little going on. If we take a look at the entire North Atlantic region on the old GFS, the only thing that I think is of any minor interest is the upper low that cuts off in the Central Atlantic that we've been talking about for the past 4 or 5 days. We actually started talking about this over the weekend. That upper low does cut off, and a bit of a low develops here. Now, whether there's enough time for this to become tropical or not, or whether the conditions aloft are even favorable, to me, they may not be. That just eventually gets kicked out to the northeast anyway, so it's not as if that's any kind of threat to anyone. In the meantime, the models, which usually love to spin things up, continue to rather uncharacteristically not spin things up in the tropical Atlantic. Even the always dependable Canadian model, always wanting to spin up anything and everything that it gets into its path during the months of August and September. Even the Canadian model is having a tough time spinning things up. So the impact of the upper air lows that we're dealing with, just too much. The shear, the wind shear that we're seeing across the tropical Atlantic, and on top of that, the fact that you've got this Saharan dust at play really is working against the development. In fact, if you notice, we have strong westerly winds here. Just looking at the wind flow, we have strong westerly winds in the upper atmosphere, just ripping across the Caribbean and right up through parts of the tropical and subtropical Atlantic. Yes, there are areas where we do see low wind shear environments, but the vast majority of the tropical Atlantic and down through the Caribbean basin, at least, does not look at all favorable to support anything from forming. So we're going to need to see a wholesale change in the upper air pattern across the tropics in order to see any kind of tropical storm development on the Atlantic side. And by the way, someone did point this out. It's only August 1st, and I almost feel a bit silly to mention this, but I did see it on a Twitter tweet, so I might as well put it out there, since if I don't put it out there, I know my buddy Anthony Orr will come up with this statistic. But the last time that we had no tropical storm or hurricane activity, in other words, a complete shutout during the month of August, was back in August of 1997. Before that, I don't know. That's the last time. So basically, we're talking 20 years, 21 years ago, the last time we had an August that didn't have a tropical storm or a hurricane in the Atlantic basin. It is, since it's that long of time since that the shutout happened, it goes without saying that August is a month where there's usually at least one named storm somewhere along the line during the 30-day stretch. And we've got a long way to go from the beginning of the month to the end of the month. Okay, hi to everybody. Big collective hello. Jason Schaefer, Long Island hasn't gotten very much out of this pattern the past 2 weeks. And yes, the weather has been very dry, and on a lot of the days where these downpours have been happening, Long Island has turned out to be partly sunny and good beach weather. I think that's the case the next couple of days, by the way, because of the fact that the trough axis is so far to the west. It's even further west than it was last week. So I wouldn't at all be surprised to see clouds, morning low clouds breaking out into some sunshine and very little in the way of downpours there. The threat for downpours will be higher as you go to the west, western New Jersey, and on westward. Timothy Veltman, missing seeing me yesterday. At least I had work late. Yeah, I just wasn't feeling it yesterday. I really needed it. I honestly needed another day off. You got to recharge your batteries every once in a while, Timothy, and mine needed serious recharging. Dark night. Rain all day, heavy in Alabama. You saw on the radar from earlier that rain did extend. The activity of showers and thunderstorms down into the Gulf states extends down through eastern Alabama and the Florida Panhandle. And by the way, let me mention, as always, if you're watching this on the replay, please be advised it is 6:22 p.m. Eastern Time. So obviously the satellite and specifically the radars are dated. So you want to check your local National Weather Service office for anything regarding current weather conditions and severe weather. And you can find that if you go to weather.gov and just find where you are on the map and click on it, and it'll take you to your local National Weather Service office. Been pretty sunny up your way, Timothy, in upstate New York, in and around the Albany area. Heavy rain went through here earlier. Interested to see what these storms out by Cooperstown develop into before they get here. They may wind up falling apart by the time they reach your area too. So they flare up and they disappear. Let's see. Did Hershey Park reopen? I don't know. Did they? I would have. I don't know. If anybody knows, I'd be curious about that. William Huber, yep, dry, mid Long Island, just unbelievable how the storms disappear when they come up here. It really is amazing. That boilerplate just sits overhead. The trough is too far west. And even with the trough close by, even when it is, we don't seem to be seeing really strong definable systems that rotate around and come through and help to hold the thunderstorms together. They haven't really had the best of support. Yeah, they have all this tropical air, but you got to have something to trigger it off. And at least from the standpoint of the coastal areas, it hasn't really been there. Yes, I did have that dew point map up earlier. I got to go back and figure out how I got it in the first place. The heat wave in Europe continues, Reaver. Probably going to see temperatures up above 100 degrees in Spain, Portugal, France, and into the 90s again in parts of England. I know the British, I've been reading, enjoying their summer to some degree because of the fact that getting some really good beach weather, which they don't get too often in England. The weather all week, Patricia Owens, highs in the 70s and low 80s, so that's very nice. But my Weather Channel tells me that there are about 8 days of rain, so it's on and off every day, but when it rains, it really rains. That's when you're in a tropical flow like this with the trough in the east, and yes, when it rains, it really comes down. It's like it's like a running faucet. It's like a gigantic running faucet. Somebody turns that faucet on, it pours, and then just as fast as it turns on, it oftentimes turns off. I knew Anthony Orr would come through for me. He always does. No named storms in the Atlantic Basin since July 15th. Since the year 2000, only 2 years have had no named storms from the period of July 16th to August 5th in the Atlantic Basin. Okay, that's 2 years since 2000. So in the last 18 years, so 16 out of the last 18 years have had at least one storm in that one named storm in that period from July 16th to August 5th. They've got 4 days to go on the Atlantic side. They're not going to get it with what we have out there at this point. Matthew Goodman, Hershey Park is open. He thinks it's open. Okay, good to hear. The rain in Pennsylvania today also did not live up according to SPC's expectations from earlier. But one thing I will bring up for much of Pennsylvania, northern New Jersey, a good chunk of upstate New York and in around the Catskills, and extending southward from there into Maryland. There's a large area where there is a likely risk of river flooding if you get any kind of thunderstorm activity. If you get any kind of thunderstorm activity that clusters up and just sits over a particular area for a while and dumps a fast couple of inches, you're going to get river flooding because the rivers and streams are at absolute capacity right now. So bear that in mind if you live near any rivers, streams, creeks, and so on in that particular part of the Northeast, because it really is not going to take much to trigger off some river flooding. All right, folks, we'll leave it here at this point. The Joe and Joe Weather Show, which actually took 2 days off, will be back on tonight, and we'll have that on for you sometime. Figure plus or minus 15 minutes of 9 o'clock Eastern Time on my Facebook page, Meteorologist Joe Cioffi, or on Joe Rayo's Facebook page, Joe Rayo Weather. Really fast, Johnny Quest says, being in the mountains, rain has really come down, averaging we only averaged 3.45 inches for the month of August. You probably will break that today or tomorrow if you haven't broken it already, Johnny Quest. This is going to be some, you're going to have some rainfall stat for the spring and summer, but when we come to the end of the summer months, if this pattern doesn't change. And kind of hope you do get some dry time. One of the things, at least from the standpoint of hot weather, with the soil moisture content being very, very high, that at least might cut down on the heat to some degree, might knock it down by a few temperatures lower than it otherwise would be. All right, so back to Facebook, the Joe and Joe Weather Show tonight, plus or minus 15 minutes either side of 9 o'clock Eastern Time. We've got weather stuff up on the website, so be sure to check that out at meteorologistjoecioffi.com. Also, just to remind everybody, we're a participant in the Amazon Services Associates program and also in the Ebates affiliate advertising program. It's a way for this channel to earn fees by linking to Amazon and also by linking to Ebates. If you shop, you can shop on Amazon using the link that's provided on the descriptor to this live stream or the descriptor to this video, and you get your stuff. Amazon throws me back some coin, and everybody's happy. And Ebates, if you use Ebates, you can actually get some cash back on where you shop. And Ebates has every major and probably every minor retailer is on eBay. So thank you for those of you who have used either one or both of those. Okay, have a great evening, everybody. Hopefully we'll see you on the Joe and Joe Weather Show later on tonight. And if we don't, we will see you tomorrow.